In today's video, we're going to look at 10 patch ideas using utility modules to bring out the best in your patches. Welcome back. So if you've been using modular for any length of time, you realize very quickly that really the heart of any good patch are utility modules. They're the special sauce that kind of bring out the best in other modules. And utility modules are the ones that make your patches move and have a lot of dynamics to them and don't feel flat and lifeless. So in today's video, I wanted to do something a little bit different. I wanted to explore some ways that utility modules can add a lot of movement and modulation to other parts of a patch. And to do that, I'm going to use some new modules from Nekyia, which are these ones you see here. They're a new modular manufacturer from Greece, and they sent me a few of their new modules. And I got to say, for a new kid on the block, they've done a pretty good job of coming out with some very interesting modules. A complex LFO, a dual channel mixer attenuverter, a dual low pass gate, and a multi-mode filter with a lot of cool little features. Okay, let's start by setting up a fairly simple patch. We're going to start with Pizza, and the first one I'm going to explore is Sosumi, which is this dual low pass gate. Now, the lovely thing about low pass gates are not only when you ping them, you get a kind of a sound out of it. There's a lovely rich tone to the sound. And that's one of the reasons people really like them. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to patch the output into my mixer here from the gate. And now I'm just going to patch in a ping input here, a gate input from my Oxy 1. Basically now, anytime a little square wave pulse or an envelope comes here, we'll get a nice sound out of here. As you can hear, it's quite short and plucky. So what I want to be able to do is I want to elongate how long the sound is coming out of the gate. I can use the CV input here on Sosumi to modulate how long the sound plays for. So let's do that. And we'll start off by using Opal. Now Opal I really like, and you've seen me use it in a few other videos. It has two channels, X and Y, which you see here at the outputs are on the bottom. And each of these three inputs can be mapped to either X or Y or nothing. If you patch a cable in, the knob becomes an attenuverter. And if you don't, the knob generates a +5 to -5 of offset voltage. So it's an attenuverter as well as an offset generator, which is going to come in really useful when we start exploring Obsidian over here. But for now, let's just patch the output here of X, the X channel, into the CV input. And we'll make sure everybody is not on X. These are not on X now. I'm going to put the top control to X, so it's going to generate a voltage. But what I really want to have is I want to have something a little bit more dynamic. I want a bit more movement in the sound. So why don't we take one of these LFOs here out of Obsidian? And this gives us a good opportunity to explore some patch ideas with Obsidian. Well, first of all, what is Obsidian? It's a dual LFO. We've got two LFOs with a triangle and square wave output for each. But nicely, it's got this lovely analog maths section here in the middle. And this basically gives you the sum, the difference, the min and the max of each LFO output. And we're going to explore that in a bit more detail. The knobs control the speed of the LFO, and you can see the rate there indicated by the LED flashing. And also there's a nice feature that these knobs here, if you've nothing patched into these CV inputs, they basically cross-modulate the speed of each other. So this LFO modulates this one's speed and likewise this direction. And if you have these set like this and these running at different rates, you're going to end up with a very complex sort of evolution of speed over time, and that gives a lot more movement. If you do have CV patched in here, this becomes an attenuverter for it. Now let's take a look at the output here of this channel, and that is a triangle wave, which you see on the oscilloscope. So, if I turn the knob here to speed it up, it can go quite fast. So let's just set it there. We could also just have one LFO adjust the speed of the other like I talked about, and you'd see it changing there. And we can use that to create more variance and movement. And we're going to patch that into the input here on Opal. Now we've got a much more variable sound going in. As you can hear now, it's changing a lot more. And I can actually patch into the volt per octave input here on Pizza. Now, the reason I chose Pizza for this patch is it has lots of great opportunities to modulate it. Woohoo! You can really have a lot of fun by just modulating things like the FM index and the wave shaping. Hear all that? Now let's take a look at some of these central outputs here, because I want to use them to modulate the sound on Pizza as well. And this is a sum, a difference, and a min and a max output. So basically, it takes the two waveforms and gives you the sum of the output of the wave shapes at that point in time, the difference between them, whichever is the lowest value and whichever is the max value. The other nice thing is these two switches here allows you to choose which waveform gets sent into this maths section. So you could send in two square waves, for example, and then this actually becomes a really interesting sort of trigger generator. A square wave and a triangle wave, or two triangle waves. So let's set the two triangle waves as the inputs, and we'll take a look here at, say, the min output. And the min output is going to change depending on the relative speed of the LFOs. Obviously, the faster one goes, it'll change a lot. And so let's now patch that into the FM index control here on Pizza. Now we're getting a lot more movement to our sound, which is good. Now we'll also add that modulation of the gate length. Let's bring in another LFO here, and this, say, is on channel 3, which is the blue channel on my scope. And we'll take the difference output there of the different LFOs, which is just the voltage range here. And you can see that blue waveform is quite erratic. It's periodic, but quite erratic. So let's patch that into, say, wave shape. Throw a bit of reverb on that. On Yester Versio, which is actually running the Desmosis Versio wave firmware. Bring in some drums. Input here. Now let's look at how we can change the wave shape of the LFOs that come out of here. And for this, we're going to use this symmetry input. So I'll just patch channel 1 on the oscilloscope, which is the yellow trace, into the Y output here. And we're going to use this knob here to generate the offset voltage on Y. I'm going to set that switch to Y, patch it into the symmetry input here on the first LFO. Now watch what happens as I increase the voltage, the wave shape changes. So we get, now we're almost at, as I increase the voltage, so far it's almost off the screen, we're almost just at a straight ramp down. And if I go negative, we go back to a triangle, and we can go to a ramp up. So what about some cross-patching ideas? Because the most fun you can have is when you start cross-patching one LFO into another. Let's do that. Let's take the output, say, of the minimum output here. We're going to patch that into the Y input there. And now what's going to happen is the LFO wave shape is going to change. As you can see now, it's a far more variable wave shape, which means now that our modulation is going to sound entirely different. Now, in the previous patch, we've been using Obsidian as a free running LFO, which means it's freely adjusting its own frequency here, but we can actually pseudo-synchronize it to a clock. Now, it doesn't actually have a clock sync input, it has a reset sync input on both sides, which resets the LFO waveform. So what I'm going to do is a slightly unusual patch. What I want to do is use Obsidian to open and close a VCA over here that I have up on the top of my rack here. And what we'll do is we will take the output of this first waveform here and patch that in on the yellow channel on the oscilloscope. Now straight away you see that's just a triangle wave. So what we want to do is adjust this wave shape using the symmetry control here. And now you see it's more of a down ramp. And we'll do the same with the pink trace, which will be the second LFO. And I'll talk about the symmetry control in a little bit in the video. And we're going to do this under control of the clock in a minute. But what I want to do first is just get the waveform shapes set up here. So you see the left and right outputs are now showing there on the oscilloscope. Now the idea here is I want to go for a slightly more ambient sounding patch. So let's see what this sounds like. We can adjust the relative speeds. Now, of course, they're free running, so they're not in sync with each other. So what I'd like to do is synchronize them with a clock or some sort of reset output. Now, of course, I have a clock that I can generate here, but it's a little bit too fast for my taste. For this particular patch, I want something really slow. So what I'm using is the A and B sequencer here on Steppy as a very, very slow clock divider. So taking my already slow clock and dividing it down even further. So now you'll see the halo cable flash here whenever we send in the reset input. So let's just do that on both sides over here with the A and B. And now while that's playing, I can actually send a pitch sequence in from the Oxy 1 here. And of course we've got these sum and difference outputs here, so I'll maybe map that into the control and that into the FM index for the difference. Ooh, harsh there. You can throw a little bit of delay on this. Because we can cross-modulate the LFOs against each other, it's possible they can slowly adjust each other's waveforms and speeds. Can tweak around the cross modulation. Alrighty, a lot of fun from just using some different features, this time Opal as a mixer on the first two channels and an attenuverter on the second channel, bringing another VCA in, and then mixing the audio outputs from a multi-output oscillator like Pizza into Opal, and then clock syncing some of the half of the LFOs on Obsidian. So great use of both LFOs and mixers. Let's play with some more patches. Well, now let's turn our attention to the Root Locus, which is a multi-mode filter, and it has dual inputs, 1 and 2 here, which you can crossfade between. It's got 4 outputs. It's got a main output as well, which allows you to sweep between different filter modes, all under CV control, and the crossfade allows to choose from 2 different inputs. And it can also self-resonate, which means it can actually be turned into an oscillator, and if you hit this switch here, it can be turned into a quadrature LFO. So there's a lot going on in this, and it illustrates one of the fun things you can do with filters in your rack is if you can get them to self-oscillate, you can actually turn them into oscillators, and they're great for kind of those plucky sounds. So let's try doing that. We'll just patch the output here of the filter from the out into the channel on our mixer here. And I'm just going to patch a gate from the Oxy1 sequencer into the ping input, okay? Now, when I hit play there, we're pinging the filter. It's self-resonating because the resonance is up really high. And the sound, the frequency of the sound is controlled now by the frequency knob, but it's also got a full proctive input. I've just got a randomized sequence programmed in here on the Oxy. So now we're actually just playing the filter. These controls don't really do anything now if you're pinging it. We can also listen to the low frequency output. And that's the output of a low pass filter, band pass. A nice little snappy high pass output. And in this case, the resonance now adjusts sort of the decay time of the sound, right? So the more I turn it up, the longer it pings for. And then we can also hear the same effect here on the main output, where we can sweep from low to high pass and also change the sound. Well, you can probably predict where this patch is going to go, given that we have the Obsidian sitting over here, happily generating LFOs. Let's get those LFOs to work, okay? A little bit of delay. We can actually turn it into more of a bass. Let's go back to basics and use it as just a regular filter. And so we'll take the output of our two of our outputs here, the main oscillator into input 1, and again we'll take the octave oscillator into input 2. Now let's take a listen to the output of the filters. This is a more normal use of a filter. So we'll turn the resonance all the way down, we'll open up the frequency. Now we're listening to the sound of the oscillator, and we pan across here to input 1. And what I want to do this time is I want to turn Obsidian into sort of a pseudo-envelope generator. So let's take a look at the output of Obsidian right now. Now we can see the output of Obsidian is still just a basic triangle wave here. So what I'm going to do is patch the X output here, this offset voltage, into the symmetry input, which will create a nice sort of down ramp envelope, which I'm going to patch into the filter over here. So now things are going to be a little bit more interesting. We can patch it into the frequency of CV input there. And remember, we'd like to clock sync this, so we're going to reset sync it with the main clock. On the square wave input between the two filter outputs. And we can take the output here, the max output, into the filter mode. Don't forget, we've still got more outputs here that we can modulate things with. Into the FM control here. So just through some clever modulation and a little bit of inventive patching, we can cross-modulate the oscillators there, change it all up. here's something fun I like that is a great patch, of course, if you want to make any sort of techno using dark matter. Patch the kick into the input, take the crossfader output, patch that into your mixer. We can do a bit of modulation on that too. Alright, for this patch I've kind of mixed things up a little bit and I'm using the filter in an unusual way, and it shows one kind of different way you can use a filter, which is inserted into the feedback loop of a different module. And in this case what I'm doing is I want to put the filter in the feedback loop of the dark matter so I can actually cut the different types of frequencies going into the feedback section over here around that kick. But also what I want to do is mix in another oscillator output, this time the pulse oscillator from Pizza. So let's take a listen. So first of all, we'll just turn off everything. There's our straight kick coming through. Nice and clean. Now we'll bring up the feedback section. You can hear now what I'm doing is adjusting. That's the input straight from the output of the feedback section going straight into input 1. So now this is the pulse output of the Pizza oscillator. Now we can throw in a bit of movement on this. Audio rate modulation now of the crossfade between the two inputs on the filter. Well, one of the things that you can take advantage of with a filter that self-oscillates is to turn it into an LFO. So let's look at how we can turn Root Locus into a quadrature LFO. What's a quadrature LFO? It's one where each of the outputs are slightly out of phase with each other, which is actually great if you're doing slow ambient music and you want to bring in and out different parts of your patch. Now, if you just turn up Root Locus and turn up the resonance, you're not going to get it to oscillate. So what you need to do is you need to send it a ping on the clock input. So we'll just patch the clock output there into channel 1, which is the yellow channel on the oscilloscope, and I'm going to patch that into the ping input. Now we're going to take the subsequent inputs on the scope channels 2, 3, and 4, and we're going to look at what happens to the outputs here. So let me just turn on the clock. So you see the clock there. And we straight away see that channel 2, which is this output here, is now giving us a nice sine wave. And I'll patch the bandpass output there. And we have a slightly out of phase with the previous channel's sine wave. And say we patch the green channel there is the high output. Now it's out of phase again. So if you look there on the scope, you can see that the amplitude is adjusted a bit by the resonance here, obviously the frequency. Now we can clock divide. So now we have clocked synced LFOs coming from a filter. Another cool thing we can do with a filter like this is we can actually filter other LFOs. Let's take a look. Let's patch the yellow channel into the output of the first half here of Obsidian. We're going to patch that into, we'll just turn that, open up the filter and turn down the resonance. We're going to patch it into input 1. Now with sub-range turned on, we now have a filter that will filter LFOs, low frequencies. And I'm going to turn back on the pink channel so we'll actually see it. Now with the filter wide open, the output of the low pass filter is pretty much equivalent to the input, just the tops are slightly rounded because it's got a little bit of filtering there. But as we dial down the filtering, look how the shape changes. It's a low pass, so only the low frequency pieces of the input LFO are passed. And what would that mean for an LFO? Well, it basically means the bits that where there isn't a dramatic change in the wave shape. We could also look at it, say the high pass frequency output here. Then again, as I dial it down and bring up, say, the resonance, we can change the filter type. Now let's play around with a patch where we turn Obsidian into an oscillator by dialing it up into audio rates and also using the symmetry input now to modulate the pulse width of the outputs, because when you are using symmetry with the square wave outputs, you can actually do pulse width modulation. So let's start setting up our patch. First of all, we'll take our two outputs from Obsidian into input 1 and input 2 of our Root Locus. And if we were to just take the output of Root Locus now and listen to it, it would be pretty harsh. So let's patch that into a VCA, and we're going to patch the envelope here out of the envelope generator in Phaserville, and we'll patch the output of our VCA into our mixer. We'll take the gate output here and trigger there. That way we now have something a little bit more controlled. Now let's patch in the symmetry here from X and Y. And now I can crossfade between the 1 and 2 input. They're at slightly different frequencies. Well, on that little patch demo there, I was just taking two different LFOs, one triggered, both triggered by the clock and track 2 on tact here, into crossfading between the two inputs from the two different outputs here over on Obsidian, and also pinging the filter here so we get that squelchy sound. And then I'm just taking two LFOs here, attenuating them through the Y channel and the X channel to adjust the pulse width over here on the oscillator, and then just using the filter, playing around with all of the other parameters and routing it through a bit of reverb and delay. That's just a really great example of unusual uses, right? We're using things in a way kind of counterintuitive, an LFO being used as an oscillator and things like that. So another great example of how utility modules can really kind of pair together with the rest of your patch to just sort of make it shine that little bit more. I hope you found today's video useful. I tried to come up with a lot of different patch ideas to illustrate how to use both these modules, but also more in general, how utility modules can be used. As always, I love hearing from people, so do leave me some comments down below of your favorite ways of using utilities. Hit the old subscribe button down below so you can stay up to date with the channel, and I'll see you next time.